Hello, it is evening, or it might be afternoon, depending on when you've chosen to listen to this. Either is fine. I don't think time has strong feelings about what we call it. I want to talk to you tonight about taxes. I realize that may not sound like something you'd choose to listen to at the end of a long day, or the beginning of a short one. But I've been thinking about taxes quite a lot recently, more than is probably necessary, and I've found that the more I think about them, the more they start to resemble something else entirely. Something almost like a river, or a conversation between neighbors, or the feeling you get when you press your thumb into bread dough and it slowly fills back in. We'll get to all of that. But first I want to tell you that wherever you are right now, I hope you're comfortable. I hope there's something warm nearby, a blanket, a mug, a radiator doing its best. I hope the light isn't too bright. If it is, you might consider turning one lamp off. Not all of them. Just one. I started thinking about taxes in February. This is not unusual. February is when the forms arrive, and the forms are a kind of summons, not a dramatic one. Nobody is in trouble. It's more like receiving a letter from a distant aunt who writes with very small handwriting and assumes you know more about the family history than you do. My name is on the forms. That's always a little startling. To see your name printed cleanly on an official document is to be reminded that the government is aware of you. That somewhere, in a building with good fluorescent lighting and a parking lot that fills early, someone has entered your existence into a system. You are a row in a spreadsheet. You are a number that begins with your social security digits and ends, hopefully, with a small refund. I find that comforting, actually. I grew up in a small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The town is called Marquette, though it could have been called something else, and I think most of us would have adjusted. My father worked at the paper mill for 31 years, and my mother taught 4th grade. And every February my parents would sit at the kitchen table with a green metal box full of receipts, and a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and they would do their taxes. This happened on a Saturday, always. My father would put on his reading glasses, the kind with no frames, just lenses that seemed to float in front of his face like small rectangular ponds, and he would spread the papers out slowly, the way you might arrange wildflowers you'd just picked. Each document got its own space. There was a reverence to it that I didn't understand when I was young, but recognized now as something important. My mother would read the numbers aloud. My father would write them down. Nobody spoke about anything else. The dog, a beagle named Gerald, would sleep under the table. The furnace would click on and off. Outside, it was probably snowing, because in the Upper Peninsula it is usually snowing in February. The snow does not apologize for this. I would sit on the stairs and listen, not because taxes were interesting to me. I was 9, and taxes were entirely abstract, like the concept of continental drift, but because the kitchen felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the furnace. It felt like something important was happening, even if that something was mostly arithmetic. I should explain what a tax is, in case you are very young or very tired. A tax is a portion of the money you earn that you give to the government so that it can do things that are difficult to do alone. Roads, for instance, schools, the postal service, the people who test whether the water in your tap is safe to drink. Bridges. The bridge near my house was built in 1958 and has recently been reinforced, and I think about the taxes that paid for that reinforcement more often than I probably should. I drive over that bridge sometimes and I nod just slightly, the way you might nod at someone who held a door open for you a long time ago. The idea of a tax is ancient. People who lived before electricity, before antibiotics, before the invention of the can opener, they paid taxes. The pharaohs collected grain. Medieval kings collected percentages of harvests. The Romans had a very complicated system that I won't go into because it would take us off course, and I already have a plan for the evening loosely held. What I find interesting is that the idea of taxation is essentially the idea that we are connected, that what I earn is not entirely mine because I did not earn it alone. The road that carried my students to school was built before I was born. The library where I first learned to love reading was funded by people who would never know my name. The air traffic controllers who guided the plane I took to see my grandmother one Christmas, their salaries came from somewhere. They came from everyone. There is something almost liturgical about that, if you sit with it long enough. I should tell you that I am a choral music teacher at a middle school. This has nothing to do with taxes directly, but it's useful context. I teach children between the ages of 11 and 14 to sing together, which is a strange and sometimes beautiful and sometimes very loud endeavor. The main thing I try to teach them, more than breath support, more than sight reading, is that the voice of the person next to you is not competition. It is company. I think about taxes the same way sometimes. In the spring of 2019, I sat down at my own kitchen table to do my taxes for the first time without help. I was 34 years old. This is perhaps later than most people manage this milestone. For several years, I had relied on a tax preparation service located in a strip mall between a nail salon and a place that sold vacuum cleaners. The man who did my taxes was named Leonard. He wore a mustard-colored cardigan and spoke in a steady, unhurried monotone that I found deeply reassuring, like the sound of a ceiling fan in another room. Leonard retired in 2018. When I received a letter informing me that the office would be closing and I should seek tax preparation elsewhere, I experienced something I can only describe as moderate existential dread, not large dread, not the kind that prevents sleep, just a persistent low hum of uncertainty, like a refrigerator that's slightly too loud. I went to the library. The library in my town is a single-story building made of red brick, and it smells like paper and the faint memory of coffee. And there are plants near the windows that have been thriving for at least a decade, despite, I suspect, irregular watering. The librarian, whose name is Dolores, knows where everything is. She does not wait for you to finish asking your question before she begins walking toward the answer. I asked about tax preparation software, and Dolores handed me 3 printed pages about something called a free filing program, and I sat in a chair by the window for 45 minutes reading them while a very small child at the next table methodically unstacked and restacked a set of wooden blocks. That child is now presumably 6 years old. I wonder sometimes if they remember that afternoon. Probably not. But I do. Something about the blocks, the patient way they kept starting over. I want to talk about 40s, the main form. It is the center of the tax universe, the way a kitchen is the center of a house. Everything else, the W-2s, the 1,099 seconds, the schedules, the supplemental worksheets that feel like bonus levels in a video game you didn't entirely want to be playing, everything flows toward the 1040 eventually. The form asks you to describe yourself, not in a personal way, not in the way a new acquaintance might ask you to describe yourself over dinner. It asks, what is your filing status? Are you single? Married filing jointly? Head of household? I have been single my entire adult life. This is not a sad fact. It is simply a fact, like the boiling point of water or the distance from here to the moon. I check the box that says single each year with the same neutral feeling I have when I note that yes, I am still the same height as last year. Yes, I still live at the same address. Though there was one year, 2021, when I held the pen over the single box for a moment longer than usual. This was not because anything had changed. It was because I had recently been reading about the migratory patterns of the Canada goose, and I had learned that Canada geese mate for life, and that if one goose dies, the other will sometimes stay behind while the rest of the flock continues south. Just for a little while. Just until it is ready. I don't know why I thought about that while filling out my tax return. I often don't know exactly why I think about things. I find it's better not to interrogate that too closely. I checked the single box. I moved on to line 2. Line 2 involves your wages, salaries, and tips. I receive a salary from the school district. It is a modest salary, which is a polite way of saying it is not large. I teach choral music to children who are at an age when many of them would prefer not to be singing. I do not say this resentfully. I say it because I think most people who do work that matters are not paid in direct proportion to that mattering, and I have made my peace with this, mostly. There was a year, I think it was 2016, when I was paid an extra amount for running an after-school rock band elective. The elective was my idea. It was attended by 8 students, 2 of whom were there because their parents needed somewhere for them to be between 3 and 5 p.m. The other 6 genuinely wanted to learn to play music. One of them, a girl named Sienna, could play the drums with a natural ease that I found quietly astonishing, like watching someone walk into a room and immediately know where all the furniture should go. The extra pay for the rock band elective appeared on my W-2 as a separate line item. I spent more time staring at that number than at my main salary. There was something about it, about the fact that a thing I'd invented, a small gathering of children making noise with instruments in a gymnasium on Thursdays, had generated an official financial record, that it had left a mark on the paperwork of the world. Sienna graduated 2 years ago. I heard through another teacher that she's studying music in college. I think about that sometimes when I look at a W-2. Deductions. Deductions are the part of taxes that feel like a small act of negotiation with the universe. The government says, we know that earning money also costs money. We know that some of what you spent this year went toward things that have a broader benefit. Tell us about those things, and we will reduce what you owe. There are two ways to handle deductions. You can take the standard deduction, which is a fixed amount that Congress has decided represents a reasonable approximation of the things most people spend money on. Or you can itemize, which means listing your actual expenses one by one, like reading aloud the items in a grocery bag. I take the standard deduction. Most people do. The standard deduction is, in many ways, an act of trust. You're saying, I believe that this number, which I did not calculate and cannot fully verify, is a fair representation of my situation. There is something almost humble about it, something almost communal. You're choosing to be averaged in with everyone else, to let the collective experience stand in for your individual one. I find that easier than it probably should be. There is a line on the tax form for educator expenses. I did not know about this for the first several years of my teaching career. It is a deduction of up to $250 for money spent out of pocket on classroom supplies, school supplies, things purchased with your own money for the benefit of your students. When I learned about this deduction, I went back through my records for that year and found that I had spent, out of my own wallet, on sheet music alone, approximately $412. Sheet music is not cheap. A well-arranged choral piece for middle school voices can cost between $1 and $4 per student, and you need a copy for each student, and you need multiple pieces per semester, and the school budget for music is, in most years, approximately enough to cover pencils. I have a filing cabinet in my classroom that contains, in organized folders, every piece of sheet music I have purchased in 17 years of teaching. This includes a particularly beautiful arrangement of October by Eric Whitacre that I bought in 2009 for a concert that was ultimately cancelled because of a water pipe issue in the gymnasium. I have never performed October, but I keep the copies. I keep them because I believe that we will get to it eventually, or we won't, and the copies will outlast me, and someone else will find them and think, who was this person, and why did they care so much about a song about autumn? I claimed the educator expense deduction every year after I learned about it, $250, returned in small part to me. The government in this way acknowledged that I was spending money on other people's children, that it noticed, that it counted. I found this unexpectedly moving. I want to take a small detour here if you'll allow it. When I was in graduate school, I studied music education at a university in Ohio. I had a professor named Dr. Yablonsky, who taught a seminar called The Philosophy of Musical Community. It met on Tuesday afternoons in a room that had a broken radiator and a view of a parking garage. There were 6 of us. We drank coffee from a shared carafe that someone refilled at the start of each session without being asked. The refiller rotated, but never on a schedule. Someone simply noticed when it was getting low. Dr. Yablonsky said, once, something that I have thought about many times since. She said, every act of contribution to something larger than yourself is, in some small way, a form of song. I have turned that sentence over in my mind for many years. I'm not entirely sure what it means precisely, but I think it has something to do with taxes. I think it has something to do with the way the coffee carafe was always full when you needed it to be, because someone, somewhere, had paid attention and acted without being asked. I think it has to do with roads and bridges and the water in your tap and the people who test it. It is possible that you are, at this point, beginning to feel sleepy. That is the intention. If you are lying down, you might shift slightly to your left or right, whichever feels better. If you have a pillow that's slightly too warm, you can flip it. The other side is cooler. This is a reliable fact about pillows and one of the small, consistent pleasures of being alive. Let me tell you about the year I got a refund of $1,231. I don't know exactly what I expected. I had entered all my numbers into the software, and the software had processed them, and a number had appeared in a box at the bottom of the screen. It was larger than I'd anticipated. The software had a small animation, a brief fireworks burst, 3 seconds long, that I suspect was meant to convey celebration. I sat with the number for a moment, $1,231, returned to me because I'd overpaid throughout the year, a little each paycheck, and now the accounting was settled. The government and I had come to an agreement, and the agreement was, you gave us too much, so here is some of it back. We are square. I thought about what to do with the money. There is a particular quality to a tax refund that is different from, say, a paycheck. A paycheck feels like you earned it this week. A refund feels like you found it, like reaching into the pocket of a coat you haven't worn since last March and discovering a $20 bill, except larger and accompanied by paperwork. I spent 3 weeks thinking about the refund before I touched it. During those 3 weeks I considered, a new coat, mine has a broken zipper on the inner pocket, has had one for 2 years, a trip somewhere warmer. I have never been to Portugal. I have thought about Portugal occasionally. A donation to the food shelf 2 towns over. A set of better quality coral risers for the school. The current ones wobble slightly, and wobbling risers make children feel, I believe, subtly less dignified, and children deserve to feel dignified when they sing. I bought the coral risers. They cost $940, which left $291. I put $100 of that in savings, and spent the other $191 on a long weekend in a cabin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, not far from where I grew up, in a town where they still have a diner that serves breakfast until 2 in the afternoon, and the coffee is not excellent but is consistent. I sat in that diner for 3 hours one morning, reading a book about migratory birds, and drinking 4 cups of average coffee, and looking out the window at a parking lot where it was snowing steadily and peacefully, and without any apparent agenda. I thought, this is a good use of a tax refund. There is a section of the tax form concerned with retirement. This section asks whether you have contributed to something called an individual retirement account, or IRA. An IRA is a kind of financial vessel, a small boat you build now to carry you across a body of water you cannot yet see. I started contributing to an IRA at age 31. This is technically a little late. Financial advisors, who speak in a kind of cheerful urgency that I find both helpful and slightly exhausting, tend to recommend starting in your 20s. But I started at 31, and I have contributed every year since, and the boat is small, but it is seaworthy, I think, or at least it is floating. I sometimes think about future me, the person who will be 65 or 70, sitting in a chair somewhere, in a house I have not yet found. I think about what that person will be like, whether they will still love choral music the way I do now, or whether that love will have shifted into something quieter and less directly employed, whether they will still take long walks and notice things, whether they will still feel the same reverence I feel now when I see a well-maintained public building, a clean stretch of road, a bridge that holds. I hope future me is patient. I hope they have found by then a pillow that doesn't get too warm. The IRA contribution reduces your taxable income by a small amount. It is the government's way of saying, we want you to think about the future. We want you to put something aside. We have built this incentive into the tax code because humans are, in general, not naturally inclined to sacrifice present money for future comfort. We need a little encouragement. I find this also unexpectedly moving. I want to talk about the self-employment tax, because it affects some people I know, and because I find it philosophically interesting in a way that I realize probably makes me unusual. If you work for yourself, if you are a freelance musician, or a private tutor, or someone who makes things and sells them at a farmer's market, you pay a self-employment tax that covers Social Security and Medicare contributions. When you work for a traditional employer, your employer pays half of this tax on your behalf. When you work for yourself, you pay both halves. I know a woman named Margaret who plays the hammered dulcimer and teaches private lessons and sells handmade greeting cards at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. Margaret is 62 years old and has lived in our county her whole life, except for 4 years when she went to college in Vermont, and one summer she spent in New Mexico helping her aunt tend a garden. Margaret is very good at all the things she does. She is one of the kindest people I know, in a way that doesn't call attention to itself. Margaret pays the self-employment tax every quarter. She told me once, in the parking lot of the grocery store, that she considers it her dues. Not dues in a resentful way. Dues in the way a musician might say it, as in, I am a member of something and membership requires contribution, and I am glad to be a member even when the dues arrive. I thought about that for a long time after she drove away. The parking lot of the grocery store, by the way, is where I seem to have some of my most important conversations. There is something about the transitional nature of a parking lot. The fact that you're between places, between the thing you went to do and the next thing, that makes conversation flow more naturally. You're not quite anywhere. You're briefly unscheduled. I stood in that parking lot for an extra 4 or 5 minutes after Margaret left, just thinking. A shopping cart drifted slowly across the asphalt in the wind. It moved with a kind of purposeful gravity, as if it knew where it was going, which it didn't. I brought it back to the cart corral. This is the kind of small act that asks nothing of you, and costs nothing, and adds in some unmeasurable way to the invisible fabric of everything. I should tell you about the time I made an error on my taxes. It was in 2017. I had received a small amount of interest income from a savings account, and I missed the box where this was supposed to be reported. The amount was $11.43. The interest, for an entire year, that the bank had paid me for keeping my modest savings in their care. $11.43. Approximately 6 weeks after I filed, I received a letter from the Internal Revenue Service. The envelope was plain white and had a particular weight to it, not heavy but not nothing. I opened it at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning before school. The letter informed me, in language that was formal and thorough and surprisingly free of blame, that my return had been adjusted to include the interest income I had not reported, and that I owed an additional $1.87 in taxes plus 41 cents in interest on that amount, for a total of $2.28. I read the letter 3 times. They're provided. I wrote the memo as the letter instructed. As I put the envelope in the mailbox, I thought, this is the system working. This is $11.43 by somewhere, by some process, some algorithm or auditor or combination of both. This is accountability at the scale of a cup of coffee. I felt, genuinely, a small surge of something like affection for the whole enterprise. It is getting later now, or maybe earlier. The quality of the quiet changes as the night progresses, and I think you might be feeling it. The way the edges of things start to soften, the way you stop needing to have opinions about everything. That's a good feeling. Let it arrive. The tax form has a section for charitable contributions. I gave last year to the following organizations: the local food shelf, the library's book fund, a scholarship at my alma mater for students studying music education, and a small organization that maintains hiking trails in the county. I also gave a modest amount to help pay for the repair of the organ at the church where I sing in the choir on Sunday mornings. The church I attend, not because I am certain about everything it asks me to be certain about, but because I love the music, and because the congregation is made up of people who are trying their best in a way I find comforting. The organ repair cost was $16,000. The congregation raised it over 11 months, mostly in small amounts. There was a bake sale that raised $412. There was a concert, I organized it, with Margaret on dulcimer and 2 other musicians I know, that raised $1,080. The rest came in donations, $20 at a time, $50 at a time, occasionally more. The organ is now repaired. It plays the low register again, the deep bass notes that you feel in your sternum more than you hear them. The first Sunday it played after the repair. The director played a slow chord in the key of D and the bass note came through, and several people in the congregation made a sound, a quiet, involuntary sound, like recognizing something you didn't know you'd missed. I can deduct a portion of my charitable contributions from my taxable income. This is again the government encouraging something, saying, we think it is good when people give to one another. We want to create a condition where that is slightly easier to do. We will write this into the form. I deducted my contributions. I was grateful for the incentive. I would have given anyway. I want to talk for a moment about depreciation. Depreciation is the accounting recognition that things wear out. A car, over time, is worth less than it was. A piece of equipment, a computer, a building, all of these things lose value as they age, as they are used, as the world changes around them. Depreciation is the tax code's acknowledgement that nothing lasts forever, and that this impermanence has financial consequences. I find depreciation to be one of the more philosophical concepts in tax law. We do not usually apply the principle of depreciation to people. We do not say in ordinary conversation that a person's value is depreciating. But I think there is something worth sitting with in the idea that the tax code is full of this kind of honest accounting. The acknowledgement that time passes, that things age, that what is new becomes old, that there is a number attached to this, a line item, a recognition. My father's reading glasses, the ones that floated on his face like small ponds, he wore those for 30 years. By the end they had tiny scratches on the lenses that the optometrist told him should be replaced. He never replaced them. He said he was used to the scratches, that they were part of how he saw things now. I've thought about that a lot. There is a kind of vision that only comes from seeing through something worn, something long used, something that carries the accumulated marks of use. A pair of glasses that has seen 30 years of Saturday mornings at the kitchen table. A box of receipts with a green metal lid. A yellow legal pad with the ghost of old impressions on every fresh page. Depreciation says these things are losing value. I'm not sure that's right. It's after midnight, I think. Or it will be soon, or it was recently. Time, at this hour, gets collaborative. It stops insisting on precision. I'm glad you're still here. There is a concept in tax law called basis. Your base is in something, in a stock, in a piece of real estate, in a piece of equipment, is roughly speaking what you paid for it. When you sell that thing, you are taxed on the difference between what you received and what you originally paid. Your gain. Your profit above the starting point. I think about basis sometimes in terms of relationships. What you brought to the beginning of something and what you received at the end, and whether the difference is something you could put a number on. My mother and father were married for 44 years. When my father died, this was in 2020, in April, which was a month that was difficult for everyone, and for my family was particularly difficult. I helped my mother go through his things. There were not many things. My father was not a person who accumulated objects. There was the green metal box. There were his reading glasses. There were 17 issues of a geology magazine he had subscribed to and never fully read. There were notes in his handwriting on the back of envelopes, calculations mostly, and occasionally in the margins, small doodles of birds. My father could draw birds very quickly with just a few lines. He said it was the one art he'd ever learned to do well. I don't know when or how he learned it. I never asked. This is one of those things I will always wish I had thought to ask. The basis of what my mother had at the end was immeasurable, but you can't put that on a tax form. The tax form is a different kind of record. It keeps track of what it can keep track of, and it leaves the rest to us. I have a box in my closet where I keep all my tax returns. This includes the returns that Leonard prepared, which have his signature on them in blue ballpoint pen in a very steady hand. It includes the first return I prepared myself, which has a small pencil mark in the margin from where I was making a note, and then decided the note was unnecessary. The pencil mark is just a short horizontal line. It is not a word or a number. It is a moment of hesitation made permanent. I keep these returns because the IRS recommends keeping them for at least 3 years, and in certain cases up to 7. I have kept them for 17 years and counting, which is longer than necessary by any measure. But there's something about them, something about this archive of years. Each return is a portrait of a year. Here is what I earned. Here is what I spent that mattered to the government. Here is whether I owed something or was owed. Here is my signature, affirming that to the best of my knowledge and belief, these things are true, under penalty of perjury. I always pause at that line, under penalty of perjury. I am declaring that these numbers, which feel so small and so insufficient to capture anything important about a year, the music I heard, the students who surprised me, the 3 cups of average coffee in the Upper Peninsula, the morning I stood in the parking lot and watched a shopping cart drift, that these numbers are, nevertheless, true. They are. They always are. I am not lying about my earnings, my deductions, my contributions, my retirement savings, my filing status. I am single. I am a choral music teacher. I earned this much and spent this much and gave this much and saved this much. That is the year, in numbers. The rest of the year is somewhere else, filed in a different kind of box, organized by a different kind of system, one that doesn't have a label yet. I want to tell you one more thing before we're done. In 2022, I attended a community meeting about the county budget. This was held in the gymnasium of the elementary school, not my school, but the one 2 miles west, where the floors are a different kind of wood, and they have a mural of local birds on the wall that I find very well researched. The meeting was not well attended. There were 17 people, including the 5 people on the county board, which means 12 of us had come of our own volition on a Tuesday evening. The board walked through the budget line by line: roads, schools, the library, emergency services, the parks, maintenance of the courthouse, which needs new gutters, the budget for the summer concert series in the park, which is free to attend and features, in July, a local band that plays standards from the 1940s and does a particularly good version of Moonlight Serenade. I sat there with a printout of the budget following along. There is something grounding about seeing exactly where money goes. It becomes less abstract. The property tax I pay, which is a different kind of tax, collected locally, not the one on the federal form, but still related, still part of the same general idea, becomes, in that gymnasium with that printout, specific. It becomes the new gutters. It becomes Moonlight Serenade in the park on a warm July evening. It becomes the mural of local birds on the wall that someone at some point decided children should grow up looking at. I voted to approve the budget. I voted, which means I raised my hand, which I had not raised in a public meeting since childhood, and there was a brief moment when my arm was in the air with 11 other arms, and the room was full of people who had come on a Tuesday evening because they cared about gutters and concerts and birds on the walls of schools. I drove home and sat in my kitchen for a while in the dark, not feeling sad exactly, just full. The night is very late now, or very early, depending. I'm going to stop talking soon, but before I do, I want to say this. I think the reason taxes make some people angry, genuinely, deeply angry, is not really about the money. I think it is about trust. Whether you believe that the places your money goes are real. Whether you've seen the bridge, stood in the library, walked the trail, attended the concert. Whether someone has held a door open for you, in the broad sense, the way that public things hold doors open, and you noticed, and it meant something. I have noticed. Many times. I think about my father's glasses, floating in front of his face, reading numbers aloud at the kitchen table, my mother writing them down, Gerald the beagle asleep beneath, the furnace clicking on and off, the snow outside steady and purposeful and free. I think about all of it, and I feel, despite everything, despite the small errors and the insufficient boxes and the jargon and the forms that ask you to describe your life in numbers, I feel mostly okay. I feel mostly like it adds up. If you are asleep, that is good. You have permission for that. If you are almost asleep, let yourself get the rest of the way there. The tax form will be there in the morning. The coffee will be warm. The box of receipts has been waiting patiently, and it has no complaints. If you are still awake, I hope you feel at least a little softer than you did when we started. The world is complicated and expensive and asks things of us constantly. But the asking is also a kind of acknowledgement. You are here. You matter to the record. Someone has printed your name on a form, and somewhere in a building with good fluorescent lighting, a row in a spreadsheet knows you exist. That is not nothing. Good night. Or good morning. Or good afternoon if that's where you are.